of us probably don't really have the luxury of that answer, but it's kind of interesting. We say that a stitch in time saves nine, and he who lies down with the dogs will rise up with fleas. But we often think that if Plan A doesn't work, then we'll adapt to Plan B. And so the key to success for some of us in life is just learning that Plan B is the better plan. But it's funny because I have a missionary friend, and he says, when you're on the missionary field, if Plan A doesn't work, then try Plan B. And when Plan B doesn't work, try Plan C, and then D, E, F, G, all the way down the line. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes life is like that. But with God, there's only one plan. It's only Plan A. So reflecting on all of this, you have to understand, if you walk with God, you'll discover over the course of time or in time that everything will work out, but it doesn't work out the way you expect. See, one of the things we often think is we can kind of dictate our own future, so we think, it'll all work out, and it's exactly the way I thought. Well, everything always works out, just not the way you expect. And so this lesson, I guess, is a lesson from Exodus 5. And it's a lesson that Moses would understand well. See, Moses knew following God meant moving out of his comfort zone. See, when we follow God, God will push us out of our comfort zone, usually push us far out of our comfort zone. Sometimes God calls us to do things that don't work out right the first time. Well, when you think about Exodus 5, it describes a super confrontation in Egypt. One man stood between the Jews and their freedom that God had promised, and that one man is Pharaoh. Only Pharaoh could let the Jews free. And as we'll see, he's not a very easy man to deal with. We'll talk about that a bit today. And that leads me to an important principle. When God is working, things often get worse before they get better. See, a lot of times people think, I'm going to just talk to God and it's going to be easy breezy and everything's going to be just fine. And, but let me tell you, when God is working, things often get worse before they get better. See, you have to understand something. God's way is rarely the easy way. God routinely puts us in impossible situations so that we will discover that we can't, but He can. And that's why He puts us in situations that are just impossible for us. J. Hudson Taylor, the pioneer missionary to China, said it this way. He said, there's 3 stages in any great work attempted for God. Impossible, then difficult, then done. I think that's a good train to follow, because if you look at the things that God calls us to do, often they're impossible, then they're difficult, then they get done. I think you should write that down.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But God says, my ways are not your ways. So when we assume that we know the mind of God or know the plans of God, we probably don't. See, because God says, my ways are not your ways. We think it should be done this way, and God has a whole different set of ideas in terms of how it all works out. And so it is in the spiritual life. We have some hope, we have some dreams, we have some ideas, we have some big thing we'd like to do for God, and we think it's going to work out exactly this way. But it must die first before it comes back to life. Otherwise, we might say we did it on our own. And we don't really do things on our own. We do things with God. But in Exodus 5, actually, Moses is in an impossible stage of doing a great work for God. He heard from God. He spoke with God. He thinks he understands God completely. And there's 3 words that show us how this whole story in Exodus 5 unfolds. The first part of it is oppression. And we find this in verses 1 through 14. See, when Moses and Aaron go to see Pharaoh, it's the first time Moses has been in the king's palace in 40 years. It's kind of funny. I mean, he hasn't been there in a long time. Well, no doubt he and Aaron went with some trepidation. I mean, when you haven't been someplace in decades and decades and decades, you're probably a little bit concerned or maybe even worried. But it was exactly what God had told them to do. Go see Pharaoh. But it didn't work. I mean, here is Pharaoh's response. It's kind of interesting. In verse 2 it says, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Well, that's the start of their meeting. See, Moses goes and tells them that the Jews should be released, they should be let go. And Pharaoh's like, "I don't even know this God you're speaking of. And I don't even have any connection. Well, what are you talking about?" See, when Pharaoh said, "I don't know the Lord," he was exactly saying how he felt. He didn't know the Lord. He didn't know God. But in reality, as this plays out, Pharaoh was about to meet him. I mean, a lot of us, we think we know God. We think we know all about God, or we think we know things about God, but do we really know the one true God? When Pharaoh said he didn't know the Lord, who is this Lord? He did not know the Lord, so he would not obey him, because why would you obey somebody you don't know? And that's the way it is with most of us. In our own stubborn ways, we don't do what God commands us to do because, in reality, if we were completely honest with ourselves, we don't know him enough to want to obey him in all the things that he's commanded us to do. Our lives would be much different. But the ultimate issue is the same for us as it was for Pharaoh. This is the big point. Who's running the show? See, for most of us, we think we run our own show. It's all about me. We're very myopic. You know, our Holy Trinity is me, myself, and I. The world evolves around me, if you didn't know that, or that's what most of us think. And Pharaoh will soon find out the real answer the hard way. Because Pharaoh thought, well, I'm in charge, I'm running the show. And most of us, we think the same thing about our own lives. I don't have to obey God. I run my own show, and I do it the way I want to do it. See, he accused the Jews of trying to trick him into letting them go. This is a big trick. Then he orders the foreman to stop supplying straw for the bricks they were making. So now the Jews had to scramble and find straw just to meet their quota to make the number of bricks that they were supposed to make. So the situation had gone from bad to worse. And that raises another key question. What do you do when you do right and things get worse? See, sometimes you're doing the right thing and you're on the right course, but things get worse. I mean, this was supposed to happen, and that was supposed to happen, and this other thing was supposed to happen. These other pieces were supposed to fall into place, and I can't find these other pieces, but they're part of the puzzle. Remember that Moses did exactly what God told him to do. Moses did exactly as he was asked to do by God. Moses and Aaron talked to Pharaoh, and it blew up in their faces. That's bad enough, but now all the Jews are suffering as a result. And you'll find out something about yourself in times like these. When God says, this is what I want you to do, and this is how it's going to work out, or so you thought, and it just doesn't work out soon enough, fast enough, quick enough, the way you thought it would work out. So then, after the opposition and the oppression, then comes another problem, frustration. So that's in verses 15 to 21 in in this chapter. So now the Jewish overseers start to complain. See, when things don't work out the way we thought they should or we wanted them to, what's the next step in the process? Yep, that P word that goes with moan. We complain. A lot of complaining, and it's not fair, it's not right, it's not the way it's supposed to be, it's all your fault. Gotta blame somebody, that comes with frustration. So now the Jewish overseers, they complained to Pharaoh about their unfair working conditions. Not only do we have to meet the quota to make the bricks to build your palaces and your estates, but now we have to get our own straw where you used to provide the straw for us. And when the Jewish overseers complained to Pharaoh, that didn't go very well either. After all, Pharaoh knows it's unfair, but then he's not really a follower of God, so he doesn't care. They just have to continue to meet their quota, and he doesn't care. And so here's his response. It's found in verses 17 and 18. Pharaoh said, "Lazy. That's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, 'Let us go and sacrifice to the Lord.' Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks." Well, you can't have the raw materials that you need, but you're going to do everything that you're supposed to do without the necessary supplies that you need to do it. That seems like a fair enough thing. Not really. That's not fair. Frustration, complaining. So, I guess the modern term for this is gaslighting. This is what politicians do. It happens when you blame people for the problems that you caused. I'm not going to give you the raw materials, but it's all your fault. You just keep making the bricks. You got to stay up with your quotas. I don't care what your problem is. It's your fault. Pharaoh does it by accusing the Jews of laziness, and yet he withholds the straw that they need to build the bricks. In fact, he says it twice in verse 17. Then what happens next shouldn't surprise any of us. Here we go in verses 20 and 21. It says, "When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them, and they said, 'May the Lord look upon you and judge you.'" See, they want Moses and Aaron to pay now. It's your fault. The judgment should fall in your lap. Because it goes on to say in verse 21, "You made us stretch, you made us a stench to Pharaoh and his officials, and you have put a sword in their hand to kill us." So, now they're really worried. Not only did Pharaoh go off on them, now it's Moses and Aaron's fault. You made such a stench to Pharaoh, and now you put a sword in their hands, and we're probably gonna all end up dead. Who did the people blame? Pharaoh? No, they blamed Moses, of course. Moses was the easier target. See, you can hardly blame the people for being angry and being upset with Moses. Nothing has gone right on this very, very bad day. So when you have somebody to blame, you pick the low-lying fruit, the easiest fruit to blame. It would be hard to get mad at Pharaoh. He was in charge. So you blame the guy that's trying to make things right. Blame Moses. When F.B. Meyer wrote about this story, his commentary, he pointed out that Moses must learn a vital lesson. See, to be a real true follower of Christ, you have to die to yourself. And Moses has to learn this lesson, death to self. See, when Moses approached Pharaoh, he had a whole idea of plans in his head. This is how it's going to work out. I'm going to talk to Pharaoh. Everything's going to be fine. But nothing worked out that way. See, Death to self for Moses meant death to his plans, death to his dreams, death to his ambitions, death to his schemes, death to his leadership, and death to his popularity. Moses, knowing his previous position with Pharaoh, he thought he could just go up to Pharaoh, have a nice little chat with him, and all the Jews would be released and everything would just be easy breezy. It would be worked out like gentlemen. Nah. Jesus talked about this in John 12:24. When he talked about, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains by itself. But if it dies, it produces much fruit. See, a grain of wheat actually has to die before it can produce many more kernels of the same. See, you can do great things for God. But the point of all of this is this: you have to die first. See, unless you die first, there's nothing more that will be added. See, there'll be many funerals and many graves to dig where we bury dreams. I've spoke of this many times in the past. It's happened frequently with people even that I know. I mean, my spiritual son, Nicholas, is one of those. 28 years old, lots of potential, lots of dreams buried. And as they lowered his coffin into the ground, that's all I could think of. What a waste. Lots of things that could have been now buried in the ground, never to be realized. Children not to be realized, marriage not to be realized, a future life, a successful life not to be realized. But I remember a long time ago, a friend of mine told me, and his name was Dwayne, I've talked about him before. He said, sometimes I hold on to things too hard. And although I probably didn't want to hear those words, Dwayne seemed to always be right. Just recently, when some things were happening, I wish Dwayne was here to talk about some things that were going on in my life. But you know, sometimes we hold on to things for dear life, afraid to let them go because we think, well, it has to be this way, my way. Watchman Nee said in one of his books that we approach God like little children with open hands. We beg for gifts because He's a good God. And He fills our hands with good things. God fills our hands with life and health, friends, money, success, recognition, marriage, children, a nice home, a good job. And when our hands are finally very full, God says, my child, I long to have fellowship with you. Reach out your hand and take my hand. And then we say, but I can't do it because my hands are too full. See, God says, do it, and we say we can't because our hands are too full with all the blessings we're holding on to. Put those things aside and take my hand, God replies. And we say, no, we can't. It's too hard for me to put all those things down. But I'm sure the one who gave them to you in the first place is me, says God. And we say, oh God, please don't ask for me to put those things aside. And God answers very quietly, you must. I think Watchman Nee's onto something here. You see, God fills our hands with blessings. And then when God says, I want to hold your hand, we say, no, I'd rather hold on to these temporary things than hold on to you, Lord. Knowing that eventually all those things we hold on so tightly to, we're going to have to let go anyways. I've learned in my 60 years, I'd much rather hold on to the hand of God than anything this world has to offer. But we hold on for dear life because oftentimes we can't imagine yielding our blessings to God. That's what it boils down to. We refuse to yield the blessings that we have to God. And that's where they came from in the first place. But little by little, God will pry your fingers open. And God will take from you your most cherished possessions. It's happened to me many times in my life. And when God gets down to the thumb, we start fighting back. But it never works. We try to fight against the Lord, but as a wise man once said, your arms are too short to box with God. We try to box with God. Your arms are too short. Oh, how happy we would be when we stop fighting and we finally say, dear Lord, take whatever you want. It all belongs to you anyways. But it's a painful process. We like to hold on for dear life to everything we have. We put God not third or fourth. We put God 10th or 20th on our list of important things where he should be number one. Like I said, there will be many funerals and many burials along the path of God's will just because we're too stubborn and we're too hard-headed to even see what God's plan is for us. And then comes lamentation. After frustration, lamentation. This is in verses 22 and 23. In verse 22 it says, O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Good question Moses is asking here. Was this plan A? If so, let's go straight to plan B. And then we see in verse 23 it says, ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak your name, he has brought trouble upon this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. So here we have Moses complaining to God. You know, it was supposed to be this way, but it's not that way. It didn't work out. I love how Moses put it. I spoke in your name, and that didn't work out at all. How many of us could say that? Lord, I called upon your name. I thought in my own mind it was supposed to be this way, and it's not this way at all. Then Moses throws the gauntlet down to God, but these are your people, and you have not rescued them. Those pronouns are reminding God, as if God needed a reminder, that this was his plan from the beginning. I did my part. Why didn't you do your part, God? That's a fair question, I suppose, from Moses. But the conclusion isn't quite right. You haven't rescued your people at all. And despite the setback, the rescue is well underway, but Moses can't see it because he's so frustrated. See, if we dwell on the frustration, we can't see what God is already trying to do in terms of a solution. See, we get mad, we get angry, we get frustrated, we get hot under the collar, we get all upset, we get ticked, and more than that. And we don't see how God's working things out for us. You know, I mean, let's face it. You know, Moses is probably saying, Lord, I played by the rules. I did exactly what you said. So why didn't it work? And now I'm going to be mad. I'm going to pout. I'm going to be angry. And God says, it's going to work out, just not the way you expect it to. See, Exodus 5 appears to be a hopeless chapter where nothing's gone right. But everything happened as God had determined. Moses was still God's man. That didn't change. And it's still in God's time, even though Moses doesn't think so. God will still deliver his people, and he will use Moses to do that. Moses will still deliver God's people from Egypt. And the time was soon to come, except Moses is now angry. See, nothing has happened by accident. A lot of times when things don't work out, we think, well, how come it just didn't work out the way I thought? See, God knows what he's doing. Most of us don't believe that when we're in the midst of troubles and circumstances, pain and pressure and problems. But God knows what he's doing. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that God's not at work. See, a lot of times we think, well, I can't see it, touch it, or feel it, so where's this God? It just means God's working behind the scenes, and you haven't been able to see it or touch it or have it yet. I'm reminded of Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, when it says this, "But when the time had fully come, God sent forth his Son." See, from the prediction of Isaiah and other prophets in the Old Testament, hundreds and hundreds of years had passed. Everybody thought, well, where is this Messiah? But when God's timing had come, not any old timing, but when God's timing had fully come, God sent forth his Son. See, God arranged everything so that the Savior was born at just the right, perfect moment in time. But if you had been in Bethlehem a week earlier, nothing would have alerted you to the birth of Jesus. Actually, the angels weren't singing, the sky was not lit, and all life proceeded as it had for hundreds and hundreds of years. If you were just there a couple days earlier, you would have said, nothing happening here in Bethlehem. But then it all just happened at once. God keeps time in his own way, not according to our way, but according to his ways. So what's the lesson in all of this for us today? What lesson should we draw from Moses' very, very bad day? You might think things didn't work out for Moses. Things don't work out for me. Maybe that's just the way it is with God. Number one, God often reveals his will through early opposition. It would, excuse me, it's like the redness around an injection site. You know, like after you get a shot and all that redness starts to bother you, you think, well, maybe I shouldn't have got that shot in the first place after you look at your arm. See, the redness only means that your body's reacting to the shot. In the same way, early opposition signals that God's work has started seem to be there. If we never faced any opposition, are we truly doing God's will? Think about this. Pharaoh here boastfully said, "I do not know the Lord." But he was about to get to know the Lord very well. We can know the Lord in two ways. We can know the Lord as a deliverer, or we can know the Lord as a destroyer. There really is no third option. As Pharaoh would find out, you know him one way or the other. But because Pharaoh did not know the Lord as a deliverer, Pharaoh would soon know God as a destroyer. The people of Egypt would pay a terrible price for the king's insolence. The Lord is your best friend, or, as in the case of Pharaoh, the Lord can be your worst enemy. Which is he for you? Is he your friend, or is he your enemy? See, what we learned from last week is Pharaoh hardened his heart, then God hardened it some more. Isn't that the way it usually goes? See, Pharaoh hardened his own heart first. And then from the text from last week, we learned that God hardened his heart even more. In the deepest sense, Pharaoh's opposition was actually ordained by the Lord. It was the only way Israel could be set free. This changes how we look at our enemies because it means that God uses them to perfect us, to knock off the rough edges. I've often said, God uses sandpaper because I felt that holy sandpaper on my skin and on my life many times. See, God will use sandpaper, maybe some other power tools if necessary, if you have more work to do than I needed. But I know God will take off your rough edges. He'll keep sanding, he'll keep smoothing until God builds your faith to the point where he thinks it's about right. And seen in this light, your enemy is actually a gift from God to you. See, we think of our enemies as, why did God put this person in my way? He's nothing but a pain in you know what. There's even Polish words for those backside things. We won't say them here, but you know the words. But I'm sure Moses didn't think of Pharaoh that way. But it's true nonetheless, a pain in the rear, a pain in the backside. There's no way that the Jews could get free without Pharaoh's permission. But he would never give that permission freely. Pharaoh would just never give the Jews up. It was his free slaves, his free labor. They were building Pharaoh's kingdom. Pharaoh's not just going to give up the Jews. And God must harden his heart to the breaking point, because only then would Pharaoh relent. It takes our enemies to humble us, and that's a good thing. See, sometimes we think, well, why are these enemies in my life? Our enemies are there actually to humble us, and that's a good thing. It takes our enemies to drive us to our knees, and that's also a good thing. And it takes our enemies to strip away our pride, and that's also a good thing. If we didn't need enemies, God wouldn't have sent enemies. He'll keep our enemies alive as long as there's a need for them. When you no longer need your enemies, they'll disappear from your life and they'll never appear again. Then he'll send you some more if you need them, but that's a sermon for another day. The second point that I want to say is this: God's timetable and our timetable are not the same. Let's remember what Moses had known and didn't know at this point. He doesn't know about the 10 plagues. See, Moses had no idea at this very point how things would work out. Moses is frustrated. Moses is complaining. The Jewish leaders are complaining. The Jewish people are complaining. Here Moses was gone for 40 years. He came back to save us. This ain't working. Of course, everybody's complaining. But Moses didn't know about the 10 plagues because those 10 plagues had not been revealed yet by God. He doesn't have a clue that soon he and the nation will be trapped by the Red Sea. He doesn't see that coming because he didn't know it was coming. He knows nothing about the golden calf at Mount Sinai. Hasn't happened yet. Or the unending complaints of the Jews who wish they were back in Egypt. He doesn't realize that the Jews, after they left Egypt, would just be complaining, send us back to where we were. We'd rather be slaves instead of dead. And all of that is hidden in the mists of the future. See, God hides things in the midst of the future so that we don't get too crazy and run away, I guess. But if Moses has any hope of doing all that God wants him to do, he must go talk to Pharaoh again. Well, it didn't work the last time. Why would he have to talk to Pharaoh again? Given how poorly Pharaoh received him the first time, I'm sure he wasn't thinking, wow, I can't wait to have another meeting with that guy. But you can't bypass that part of the journey. If God says that's a required part of the journey, you have to go through it. You'll never get to Sinai without passing through the Red Sea. See, some of us just wish, I just want to be in the promised land. We don't have to understand, well, you can't get there until you're on this other journey. See, you can't get to the Red Sea without the 10 plagues. Ouch. And you'll never get the 10 plagues without going back to Pharaoh. And you'll never go back to Pharaoh unless you ignore your critics. Over and over and over again, I come back to the verse from Job 23:10. Job in 23:10 says this: He knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I will come forth as gold. See, most of us, you're gold, but the gold has not come forth yet. The gold is hiding beneath the surface. He knows the way that I take, but when he has tried me, personally, I will come forth as gold. See, gold is often hidden in the dross, hidden in the mire, hidden with the slag. And then when the temperature's turned up, when the heat's really on, all of those things that are impure, that God doesn't want in us, they get pushed off, and then we see the gold that's really in us. It's kind of interesting. I often thought about the as gold part. I will come forth as gold. What a picture that is. God is working through my difficulties to produce pure gold in my life. I still believe that, but the part that we don't really like to hear is when he has tried me. See, you have to be tried over and over and over and over again to come forth as pure gold. That's just part of the process. You should write that verse down. Job 23:10. It's a verse worth knowing. But nowadays, I don't focus on the as gold as much as I focus on the he knows part. Those first two words in that sentence, he knows the way that I should take. See, he knows. I don't always know. What a consolation that gives us in times of trial. He knows. What hope that gives us amidst our own despair. He knows. When nothing in our life makes sense, he knows. When I feel like giving up, he knows. I return to those same two words over and over again. He knows. God knows. God knows exactly. And as long as he knows, that takes the pressure off of you and me. Because I don't have to know if he knows. Life is a journey. Life is a journey that has many, many twists and turns. And I just finished and approached my 60th birthday. Now I'm working on 61. I find that I believe in the sovereignty of God more than ever. Probably twice more than ever. Because I started this saying, well, what would I say to my 30-year-old self? Well, now I'm 60. Twice that. I have what I have because God has willed me to have everything that I have. I minister here because it's the will of God. I live where I live because it's the will of God. It's because God has called me here and willed me to be here. It's kind of interesting because I was born in Detroit, Michigan at Harper Grace or Hutzel Women's Hospital or one of those places down in the Detroit Medical Center. I have no idea why my parents went all the way from St. Clair Shores to downtown to be born. But my mom said that's where people were born. Then, life took me up to a little town in the Thumb with my grandfather. Spent many times with him up on our farm there. Learned a lot from my grandfather up in this little town called North Branch. And every week we travel between here and there and here. It's kind of interesting. And then that same journey, got married, had 3 sons and a daughter. And, it's all because God willed it so. Were all the twists and turns the ones that I would have expected? Not even close. It's kind of funny. Sometimes I think today I'm closer to my 2 puppies than I am to my 4 children. Because once children leave the nest, they go off and do their own thing. My puppies still meet me every day with unconditional love. Not so much with the kids that leave the nest and take off and do their own thing. Amen. But it's kind of interesting, all things, when we really think about them, are a gift of God. We don't see that. In our trials, in our frustration, in our problems, in our pain, in our pressure, we don't say, wow, that's a gift from God. But I've learned to look at things that way more and more. Even things that I don't like, and there are a lot of those kind of things, I try not to let them get me too irritated. Sometimes they win and I don't, and I do get irritated. But, after I think about it and pray about it, I've apportioned to myself the idea that all these things happen because of the hand of a loving God. I am what I am, and I am who that I am, and where that I am, because of the sovereign grace of God himself. I wouldn't have placed myself here. God kind of did that for me. And that means there's no such thing as luck or fate or chance. Some people think those things, or karma, some people think those things are all real. I don't believe in such little things. I have to believe that, that little girl in Sunday school when he says, God never says oops, because there are no oops with God. God doesn't wake up and say, oops, Shouldn't have went this way. Oops. Shouldn't have went that way. Oops. Shouldn't have done that. And it's comforting because we live in an oops world where mistakes are made all the time, often by well-meaning people. But God says he makes no mistakes. His word is clear. God knows what he's doing, even if I don't have a clue. If God is God, then he is just as much God on your cloudy days and on your rainy days as he is your God when there's bright sunshine. Most people don't look at God that way. When it's overcast or rainy or stormy, we often wonder, well, where is God today? Well, he's just as much God on those cloudy days and stormy days as he is on those bright sunshiny days. And the third point that I want to make, and the third take home that I want you to take home this evening is this: God's power works best in our weakness. You see, first, Pharaoh rebuffs Moses. Then his people attack him. He appears to be an absolute failure to everyone, to Pharaoh, to the people, to the Israelites. But God's not finished yet. It's easy to get puffed up and start thinking that we're indispensable. See, it was Charles de Gaulle said, the graveyards are filled with indispensable men. But do you want to make God laugh? Just tell God all your plans. See, God doesn't really need us to do anything. He spoke and the stars began to shine. The rabbits hopped across a field. He spoke and fish started to swim. He spoke and the eagle soared in the sky. He can work with us, and God can work without us. Many of us struggle with this particular concept, but God was doing just fine as God before you showed up. I hope you just heard me. God was doing just fine before you showed up. And the other interesting thing is he'll do just fine after you're gone. I want to share with you a prayer from an unknown soldier. This is not the unknown soldier in Arlington. This is a different unknown soldier. Just bear with me for a moment. Perhaps you've read this prayer. It's written by an unknown soldier from the Civil War. I asked God for strength that I might achieve. I was made weak that I might learn humbly to obey. I asked God for health that I might do greater things. I was given infirmity that I might do better things. I asked God for riches that I might be happy. I was given poverty that I might be wise. I asked God for power that I might have the ability to pray for the praise of men. I was given weakness that I might feel the need of God. I asked for all things that I might enjoy life. I was given life that I might enjoy all things. I got nothing I asked for, but I got everything I had hoped for. Almost despite myself, my unspoken prayers were answered. I am amongst men, most richly blessed. See, life is never just a straight line. We think, well, if it was just a straight line, if it was just straight down Van Dyke or straight down 9 Mile, all would be good. Life doesn't work as a straight line. God has a plan for you and me that includes a great number of potholes and detours. Whether you like potholes or not, in spite of what our governor said, she's never going to fix the roads. There'll always be potholes. And life is full of potholes and detours. The path of life zigs and zags. It goes up and down. And for a while, you'll feel like you're going in circles. Then one day, the clouds will lift and you discover that those endless circles were leading you to the top of one grand mountain. That brings me back to the advice that I would give my 30-year-old self. Everything will work out, just not the way you would expect. To my younger self, I would say, hold your dreams lightly. Everything will work out, only if you follow the Lord. I knew that probably when I was 30, but I believe it more now. And it makes all the difference. Everything will work out, just never the way you would expect. Let us bow our heads and pray. Gracious Father, We thank you for the story of Moses. We realize that life entails struggle and problems and pressures and pains and circumstances that we never see coming. But Lord, even behind the scenes, we know that you're at work. There were 10 plagues that were coming to save the children of Israel and to help Moses lead the people to the promised land. He didn't quite make it there himself, but they made it there, Lord, based on your promises, based on what you said. But those people who grumbled and complained, they didn't make it. They died off before they got there. So Lord, help us put our faith and trust in you. Help us to know that your will, your word, your ways are the best way. Help us to know that it might not seem fair, but it's in your hands. Because if we don't follow willingly, Lord, you will allow enemies and adversaries into our camp, which will get us on the path to follow you even better. So Lord, whether we do it willingly or we do it the hard way, I say, Lord, I just want to be. I want to be the man that when I get to heaven, I hear those precious words, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Because not all of us are going to hear those words, but those who truly serve you in this world will hear those words in the next. We have two options. In this world, we're called and we're expected to come. And then, Lord, in the next world, we're called again, but in that world, you'll greet us when we make it to the great by and by, based on the promises of your word. I pray that we see those promises, that we follow those promises, and that those promises lead us to eternity with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.